speaking to us on NewsX World. Shifting focus to more news coming in, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has accused Moscow of being unwilling to halt its offensive, stating that even Hamas has been ready to stop fighting, but Kremlin is not. Zelensky has spoken after a massive overnight Russian attack that killed a child and left 9 regions without power. He's also stated that Russia deliberately waited for bad weather before staging a vast attack on Ukraine's energy system, adding that the conditions reduced the efficiency of air defense between 20% and 30%. Listen in.
І те, що ми сьогодні бачили, що вони зробили, накопичували, розуміли, що вони будуть робити, чекались дощу, туману, розуміючи чітко, що і дощі заважають будь-кому працювати ширше, використовувати авіацію. Тобто вони знають, що вони роблять, ну і ми знаємо, що метеоумови десь зменшили відбиття наше десь відсотків, я вважаю, на 20-30. Я думаю, що це було, саме дало такий ефект. Да? Але тим не менш, якщо ми можемо упродовж дня майже відновити водопостачання, і я думаю, що будуть процеси щодо більш позитивного рішення по електриці, то це удар сильний, да, але він точно не смертельний. Дивіться, що відбувається. Навіть Хамас, розумієте, всі готові в якийсь момент так, до припинення бойових дій. Окрім, відповідно, Кремля, окрім, відповідно, Путіна. Ми це бачимо. І тому тут потрібно зупиняти силою.
Meanwhile, U.S. First Lady Melania Trump has stated that she secured an open line of communication with Russian President Vladimir Putin about repatriating children caught up in the war in Ukraine. And she's also stated that some have been returned to their families, with more set to be reunited very soon. The U.S. First Lady has stated that a representative was working directly with Putin's team to secure the safe reunification of children with their families between Russia and Ukraine. She's added that 8 children have been returned to their families within the last 24 hours. Listen in.
Much has unfolded since President Putin received my letter last August. He responded in writing, signaling a willingness to engage with me directly and outlining details regarding the Ukrainian children residing in Russia. And since then, President Putin and I have had an open channel of communication regarding the welfare of these children. In fact, 8 children have been rejoined with their families during the past 24 hours. Each child has lived in turmoil because of the war in Ukraine. 3 were separated from their parents and displaced to the Russian Federation because of frontline fighting. The other 5 were separated from family members across borders because of the conflict, including 1 young girl who has now been reunited from Ukraine to Russia.
With us on the broadcast is Mr. Daniel Botman, Syria correspondent for the National Telegraph, joining us from Toronto in Canada. Thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us on NewsX World. We've been seeing an increased barrage of missiles being fired from Russia into Ukraine, and likewise with energy infrastructure being targeted specifically. What do you think could be the long-term implications of this, considering that winter is just around the corner?
Well, I mean, this is very bad for the Russian Federation. They've gone from, what John McCain infamously called a gas stop in Eurasia to a country that's now importing gas. And with winter coming, it looks like the demands for fuel might increase and put real stress on the Russians. So how are the Russians going to handle this? It's going to be a very interesting winter for Russia, because they're in a very bad spot. The Ukrainians have managed to figure out how to hit their infrastructure. They've lost the Russians have completely lost the Trump administration, which gave them every benefit of the doubt, played into every one of their clearly false propaganda talking points. But the Russians never accepted a deal because the Russians are geared towards eternal war, and they're geared towards fighting Poland and the Baltics because their population is in decline. They feel like they can't defend their borders, so they want a more secure border in their view. But their entire economy is now geared towards the war, and they're afraid that if they stop the war, there'll be a massive, massive layoff of all the laborers, and then they'll have a bunch of Russians coming home who've been trained towards violence. And in Russian history, when a bunch of Russian troops come back from a foreign conflict, they tend to throw a revolt and become a danger for the regime. So Russia's in no man's land right now, where they might listen. The Russian social contract is the Kremlin's allowed to basically do whatever it wants, foreign policy expansion wise. It can bomb this place, it can bomb that place, it can commit whatever. The people don't care as long as it doesn't affect them. That's sort of the contract. You can do whatever you want in foreign policy as long as it doesn't affect the Russian people. Well, it's starting to affect the Russian people. Taxes are going up, fuel shortages are being felt, they're going to start to have to ration. So this is a very, very tight spot for the Russians. And it's what might actually end up putting an end to the war, because if Russia's ability to wage war is depleted, there will be no war, because as we've seen over the last year, it is very clear that Russia does not want to end the war. They've been given every opportunity. Trump would even give them parts of Ukraine. But the Russians are geared towards total war in Eastern Europe. They've fully committed to it. They clearly don't have the resources, the infrastructure. They clearly went on bad intel. And now it looks like the only way the war will stop is with Russia's ability to wage war being crippled. So this is a very good sign for everyone outside of Russia who wants to see the war to end, where you're going to potentially see a collapse of the Russian ability to wage war, which will be the only thing that brings an end to it.
And speaking of the war itself, we've been seeing the Americans call on EU members, NATO particularly, to also share intel on Russia's critical energy infrastructure with Ukraine. However, NATO has been adopting a very cautious, a very calibrated approach. It's trying not to toe the line because it does not want to escalate anything on the Eastern Front. Simultaneously, we're also seeing France recently having stopped one of the shadow fleet oil tankers of Russia. Could we then see Europe trying to push back against Russia in the Baltic Sea?
I think the odds of Russia, the Europeans finally pushing back increase as the Russian ability to wage war decreases, and also the Russians have been provoking the Europeans. And one of the reasons that Trump cut the Europeans out of all talks in Ukraine is because the Europeans have been, exceptionally cowardly when it comes to dealing with Russia. Always worried about escalation and this and that, while the Russians are sending drones and all that into their airspace. I mean, there's a reason why Russia did this to Turkey. Russia tried to see how far they could get away with Turkey, and they sent fighter planes into Turkish airspace. They were immediately shot down. Russia has not messed with Turkey again. Conversely, Russia has been messing with Europe significantly and is increasing its antagonism of NATO countries in Europe because the Europeans have not pushed back on this. So I think as Russia weakens, I think the Europeans might find a bit of their courage and step up and do something. But again, listen, if the Europeans step in and sort of commit to some sort of force to at least protect Western Ukraine or whatever, you'll see probably the end of a war come soon as the Europeans show their willingness to fight back against the Russians. But the European cowardliness and hedging and immobility has sort of spurred on the Russians to continue the war further and further. So one would hope that the Europeans find a spine and use that to end the war. But again, all European bureaucrats have a completely inverted philosophy, don't understand the Russian mentality, don't understand peace through strength or any of that. So will the Europeans sort of find a bit of a backbone soon? Maybe. But if I'm the Ukrainians, I'm not holding my breath for that outcome.
All right, so requesting you to stay on with us as we're